Morgan, and I have just finished reading A Bachelor Husband by Ruby M. Ayres, and I'm going to, like, this video is basically me collecting my thoughts on this. This was really good. I'm pretty sure that I finished this in approximately about the same or a little less time than I finished reading The Phantom Lover, so I would say, like, I think this might have been less than a week, because it was so good. Like, this was, like, how many pages is this? Like 312 pages, to read aloud, which is a little bit, a lot to read aloud, but it was just, the book was that good. It was so, just good pacing, really, really good pacing. The plot went along so well, and I, like, one of the things that stands out to me is, like, there's definitely a recurring theme of characters dying in this to move along the plot, because it starts off, like, pretty early on, I think in, like, chapter 2, with Marie's dad dying, which kind of kicks off everything, because, like, him dying and the will and stuff and the whole money situation ends up with Chris and Marie getting married because of that, essentially. And then towards the end, there's, like, Feathers' tragic death, and the aunt dying. It's just like, there's definitely deaths move along the plot. They're used as a plot device in this, which is, I think, a very interesting a choice by the author. And then, and I think, like, that juxtaposition of that with, like, with that leading to the marriage, with that leading to the implication, I think, at the end of the book, because the shawl that's mentioned, the shawl that Aunt Madge was making, where it says, what is it, Marie Celeste? He asked very gently, but he knew quite well that it was Miss Chester's shawl. Like, that's a baby shawl. Like, Miss Chester had made that it's implied that that was meant to be for Marie Celeste's children someday. So I think the implication is that, like, Chris and Marie will have kids. And so I think it's very interesting that it's, like, you have the juxtaposition of death with marriage and with, like, children being born and stuff. So I think it's a very, I guess, like, that's a very interesting choice thematically, I would say. Like, it creates this, how would I say, like, this notion that the world's still going on, and hope and such. And too, like, this has so many plot twists. So many freaking plot twists. Like, Marie loves Chris, she loves him, but then it's like, he doesn't love her, and then it's like, as soon as, like, he realizes that he loves her, she's falling out of love with him, and it's just so much where it's like, yep. Like, just everything that can go wrong, essentially, goes wrong in their relationship, which is really, really cool. Like, I think that's just such, like, I guess irony or humor or something. It's like, yeah, as soon as you realize that you want, like, you don't realize that you want something till it's gone. Like, I'm glad that Chris learned that lesson, and I feel like Chris, specifically him, had a lot of character growth in this, because he went kind of from someone who appears to be kind of selfish and only, like, who I think, like, sees Marie Celeste as not necessarily her own individual, autonomous, grown adult woman, but more as someone who he can boss around, to finally coming to see her as an actualized adult with her own free will that he has to listen to, and, like, that they have to, like, be able to compromise on stuff with by the end of it. I think it's nice that he finally realizes that. I feel like there's enough character growth in Chris that him and Marie Celeste can actually be happy together by the end of it. Like, the ending of them being happily married, I think, actually makes sense, because he has had enough character growth to actually make that be something that's realistic with his character. I feel like he's someone who actually looks on her as another human being by the end of it, as someone, like worthy of respect and stuff. And Marie Celeste, it's very, like, she's an interesting character, because I feel like throughout a lot of this, it's more like things happen to her rather than her being the one doing things. Except, like, it's like, I feel like she does at a few points. Like, she's a very passive, very passive character. I'd say, like, the stuff that she's doing are mostly minor things until, like, towards the end of it, where it's like she's willing to run off like she's willing to run away from a marriage that's unhappy when she feels like she was exploited and used. Like she is eventually willing to pursue her own happiness. But it's very interesting because she is described as being like an old Victorian, like she would have, can't remember the line, but it's like Dorothy described her friend Dorothy from school described her as being someone who would have been like an old Victorian housewife. So it's a very, so I would say it fits with her character that she's a very passive character. She's a very passive protagonist is how I would describe her. She reminds me of Fanny Price in that way, in that both Fanny Price and Marie Celeste are characters where it's like, it's primarily things are happening to them, and they're very rarely the drivers of their own stories. So I think that's it's very interesting to compare those two characters in that manner. And I think like it's very interesting like that this takes place in the early 20th century. Let me see if I can find the copyright date on this. Okay, it's copyright 1920 by W.J. Watt and Company. So this takes place kind of at a turning point in like society and the way that attitudes are towards men, towards women, towards marriage and stuff, because this would have been shortly after World War I, and so you do have like what's the word, like Marie Celeste, who is very traditionally feminine, is like some of the ways that society would have oppressed her are ways that it's like they're slowly moving past. Like we see other characters like Dorothy Weber and Mrs. Harriet and stuff, like they aren't really looked down upon for doing things like golfing and going outside the house and stuff. Like we're starting to see and reflected in the attitudes of the characters that like women's rights are, and like women's empowerment is slowly becoming more of a thing by this point in time. So I think this is really interesting as a work, as like a time capsule to showcase like the attitudes of this era, because this is a point where we're finally starting to see like women having more of a place in society as a whole, even if it isn't always like entirely equal. Like we are seeing active women not being shamed for being active women. So I think that's really interesting in this book, and I like how like the characters like Dorothy Weber aren't really actively shamed by most of the characters for being like more masculine, and yet characters who are more feminine like Marie Celeste still like aren't shamed for that either, except for the fact that you do have like Feathers and like what's the word, like one other thing like I want to talk about, like Feathers' attitude towards women and stuff makes me think like, and also some of the language there too, like they use words like queer a lot, and it's like, if this was written nowadays, I'd be like, he's gay representation, but it's like, no, whoops, he's actually straight. And it's like really, it's like one of those weird things where it's like, why, like, is he just like, it's really interesting because it's like, he's a character who clearly, like, like just his relationship with women, where he's mostly like a guy's guy, but it's like, does he never, like, is Marie the first woman he's ever been attracted to? It's like, what is going on there? I think it's really, like, I think he's a really interesting, very thought out, three-dimensional character, but like, it's one of those where it's like, at the beginning of the novel, like, I kind of, like, wondered, like, is he gay? But then it's like, no, this was written in England and, like, published in 1920, so that probably wouldn't have been, like, how do I put this? It's one of those things where you wouldn't have a novel, like, from a well-known published author openly talking about that, probably, at that particular time and place, even though, like, gay people have always existed. It's like, you just wouldn't hear the stories so openly, like it wouldn't be obvious in a novel. Yeah, and I think that like I really like I guess another thing I really liked is like Mrs. Harriet is kind of, like, she's an example of women tearing down other women, and it's like, oh gosh. Like, it shows that, like, even empowered women, because she is fairly empowered, like, she's someone, like, I think she's widowed, so it's like, she has a lot of freedom, she does sporty stuff, she enjoys fashion, she enjoys makeup and stuff, but it's like, she's an example of a woman showing that even empowered women sometimes aren't nice, like, sometimes have a long ways to go towards, like, being nice to and building up other women, because she is so, like, she is always stirring up drama, which is very, very, something that I find very, very interesting. Like, she is always stirring up drama, and I think she's a wonderful side character. Like, how do I put this? She isn't exactly likable, but she is a wonderful side character who helps to move the plot along. So I really appreciate that, and I also love the contrast of her. Like, she has a lot of negatives, or not negatives, but she has a lot of ways in which she's like the complete and total opposite of Marie Celeste, which I think is what makes her such a great character to have. Like, she's a very strong supporting character, especially as a contrast to someone like Marie Celeste. Yeah, and another one thing that I would say is a little bit odd about this book is like the way that the doctors describe stuff. It's like, I think usually nowadays if someone almost drowns, you give like CPR or something. You don't just have them sit in a room for a week. I don't like some of those things where it's like, I don't know if this is exactly medically accurate, but this is fiction from the 1920s, so I don't think I should be judging it for that. Yeah, like, I'm not a doctor, and I don't think Ruby Ayres was either, so I shouldn't judge. Yeah, I think this book is really, really great as a time capsule book. I think it's more empowering, I think, towards women than a lot of other novels from this time period. I really like the characterization and the contrast, and showing that both sporting women and like more traditionally feminine women both can coexist, both can be like have valid lifestyles and life choices, and that neither is less than the other, that both are completely valid. I really like that about this book. That is one way that I would interpret this book. Yeah, and I love it. I also love too how, like, I think it's probably shocking somewhat, like, how would I put this, like, in this time period, like, we have a woman who almost cheats on her husband, and yet she isn't, like, really demonized for that. So I think it also shows, like, a progression towards, like, understanding, like, women's, like, that women have their own desires and stuff. Like, I think this shows, like, the huge step towards, like, accepting that from a societal standpoint. I really think that this is a great book in that respect. Like, it doesn't just completely, like, demonize Marie Celeste and her agency. Like, it's like we see her have or develop her own agency and stuff, which I really, really love. Like, by the end of the novel, she has her own agency, essentially. Like, it's her choice. It's her choice to stay with her husband after the guy she loves dies. So yeah, I think this is an excellent book. And I kept, like, I kept wanting to just, like, I'd finish one chapter and be like, I want to read the next chapter, I want to read the next chapter. Sorry if my thoughts are, like, jostled and jumbled and stuff. I love this. And I love how it has both strong, like, a lot of female, like, strong female characters and dynamic male characters. And I feel like this is something, like, this would be really good as, like, a stage play. Like, if someone made a stage play adaptation of this, I think it would be really, really excellent. I do believe that there might be, I think there is a silent film of this, which I have not been able to, like, I haven't seen it. I wonder if it is still locatable. I would really love to see that adaptation of it, if it still exists. So yeah, those are, like, my complete, like, off the cuff thoughts about A Bachelor Husband by Ruby Ayres now that I've done reading it. And I'm like, I kind of wanted it to go on for longer. I would have wanted more, like, I wanted more, like, Marie times feathers. Like, I want more of that. But I love their dynamic too, of like, how do I put it, like, that friends to lovers, where it's like, you can clearly see he's not just, like, using her or something. I love how it's like he gets to know her as a person first. Like, that's just excellent. And I love too, like, Atkins, like, he's such a fun, like, side or background character. And I love too, like, I love how even though all these characters start off, like, being, like, not very nice towards women or, like, looking down on women, by the end of it, like, they all respect Marie Celeste. They all, like, have grown as people and respect women more, so I think this is wonderful. And also, like, I feel like from a feminist perspective, like, A Bachelor Husband is so much better than, for instance, like, The Man Without a Heart. That one was just like, why towards that. But this, I'm like, this is a very good, like, I think this is a very good novel in terms of, like, respecting women's rights, women's agency and stuff, and women in general. Which I think that's probably good, especially, and this is written by a woman author as well. So I would completely recommend this if you're looking for, like feminist novels from, like, 1920, if you can consider novels from 1920 feminist at all. So yeah, have a good day.